Hey guys, John, Mac, we're getting down to it. I got 7:58 here and some kind of change. And now it's safe to turn my phone off. This daylight savings has been really nice, but it doesn't stay light long enough. I don't know about you, but I've pretty much had it. I like summer. I don't like this crazy weather. Got a lot of stuff to talk about. Got less than a minute to go. We'll see how many folks show up here on this first Sunday in November. A lot of things going on. I hope you guys doing okay. Should I start without them? 7:59 and what? 25 seconds? I don't know. Every clock's a little bit different. There we go. Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the first Sunday in November, November 4, I guess it is. We're coming up on Election Day on Tuesday. We also are celebrating Reformation Day this day. I don't know if you're aware of that. I'm busy over here turning the wrong dials. It's just the way it is. I'll try to edit all that out at the end of the night. I'm here till midnight, editing and making it all fit the way it's supposed to fit. This is November 4th, 2018. I'm Warren Sprouse. You're on the Bible Forum. We've got a lot of different stuff that we're going to talk about, not the least of which is Reformation Day, which is today, this particular Sunday of the year. We also have the International Day of Prayer that is today. I said that today was Reformation. I think it's the 31st or November 1st. Is it 31st of October? Yeah, I think it's 31st of we just passed it. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And we get a lot of other stuff to talk about. You know what it is because you get the email every week. And if you don't get the email, you need to talk to me. You used to give me your email address. We'll put it on a list, or you can go to the website and actually subscribe. Click the buttons and do the thing. And we'll send you one every Saturday, usually by noonish or 1 or 2, depending on how much it's got to do. And it tells you what's coming up. It reminds you that Sunday's coming and we've got things to talk about. Reformation Day is one of those highlights in the Protestant world. The Catholics are not crazy about it. They don't really celebrate it, and there's a real good reason for that. And a great many of folks who are categorized as Protestants, but really aren't, like Baptists. Baptists aren't Protestant. And there's some other groups in there too that aren't Protestant. In order to be a Protestant, you had to be a protestor. You had to be protesting against the Roman Catholic doctrines and practices. And the Baptists were never in a category to do that. That wasn't where they came from. That wasn't what they were about. But Reformation Sunday is probably the most single event, a single day in world history of significance, aside from the day the Lord Jesus Christ rose from the dead for our sins. On October 31st, in the year 1517, we're talking 501 years ago. We had a big celebration last year of Reformation. over 1,400 years since Jesus rose from the grave for our sin, a Roman Catholic monk by the name of Martin Luther, a scholar, a teacher at seminary, a man who had struggled for years with his church, the church in Rome. He'd been greatly disturbed by an unprecedented sale of indulgences. Indulgences were nothing more than a scam. I think they still exist within the Roman Catholic Church. I'm not sure. I've lost touch with some of that. But it was perpetrated by a greedy pope and an industrious man by the name of Albert of Mainz, M-A-I-N-Z. And with the Pope's blessing, Albert got permission and went about selling what are called indulgences. These are get out of purgatory early passes. Indulgences for past, present, and even future sins. It was a little too much for Martin Luther. I guess the whole idea that there is a purgatory was okay with him, but the idea that you could get out early by paying money for this little thing from the Catholic Church just pushed it right over the edge. The day was November 1st. It was All Saints' Day, a special day in the church calendar. And Martin Luther took pen in hand and he wrote out what are referred to as the 95 Theses. Theses was basically a statement of fact upon which we would now debate. He had 95 of these, a written roadmap as to how he intended, asking others how they intended to deal with the subject that was under discussion. His purpose was to stimulate the debate, and he nailed these on the church door, the Wittenberg church door, on this particular day. Instead of stimulating a discussion, gathering the minds together, the scholars and the priests, the popes, and all the others together to talk about this thing, the church went the other way. It went toward persecuting Martin Luther for daring to ask the questions. In this process, the Roman Church showed itself to be well beyond simple rehabilitation. The church was completely spiritually dead. They didn't get it. Nothing in Martin Luther's mind would do except to start over. As a result, he started a discussion that would change his life and the lives of countless millions. One of the theses that Luther declared or suggested was, quote, "The church's true treasure is the gospel of Jesus Christ." Let's talk about that, is what the statement was. They didn't want to talk about that, let alone any of the other theses. And this is the sense of what we call Reformation Day in the church. The Roman Church had lost sight of the gospel because it had long ago papered over the pages of God's Word with layer upon layer of tradition. Traditions always bring about systems of works, of earning your way back to God. And it was true of the Pharisees as well as it was true in the Roman Catholic Church in medieval days. It's true in the Roman Church today. Reformation Day is the day the light of the gospel broke forth out of darkness. It was the day that began the Protestant Reformation. It was the day that led to a Martin Luther, a John Calvin, a John Knox, and many other reformers, helping the church find its way back to God's Word as the only authority for faith and practice. and leading the church back to the glorious doctrines of justification by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. It kindled the fires of missionary endeavors around the world. It led to hymn writing and congregational singing. And it led to the centrality of the sermon and preaching for the people of God. It is the celebration of a theological, ecclesiastical, and cultural transformation. And so we celebrate Reformation Day. Baptists not so much, but others do. The day those theses were posted on the door of that church, the day that reminds us all to be thankful for our past and to this monk turned reformer. But it also reminds us of our duty, of our obligation to keep the light of the gospel at the very center of all we do. Today is also International Day of Prayer for the persecuted church. The folks over at Voice of Martyrs are suggesting we pray that the believers in these places where they are being persecuted sense the presence of God. Know that we are praying for them. Experience God's comfort. See God open doors to evangelism. Boldly share the gospel. Mature in their faith. Be granted wisdom in this covert ministry they're involved in. And remain joyful amid all of the suffering, forgiving and loving their persecutors, and above all, being rooted in the Word of God. The church has lost sight of pretty much all of those things, but around the world, in places where Christianity is outlawed or is persecuted unmercifully, these people have a strong faith. They have a strong understanding of God's Word and the doctrines contained therein. It is important to them. It's important because it's actually a life and death situation. And were it that way for us here in America, we would understand these principles, these doctrines as well. Imagine yourself coming to faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, someone sharing the gospel with you, and it meaning something to you enough that you would embrace it. And then to realize that as soon as you did that, you would have new enemies. Enemies of the state, enemies of the community, enemies in your family. People who would try to stop you, hinder you, kill you, persecute you in all sorts of ways. I can imagine that one of the first things that would happen is that you would go back to your Bible, go back to whoever it was that led you to the Lord and say, what's going on? Is this real? I want to know. And as a result, these folks in these persecuted areas probably have a better understanding of the Word of God than we do. We read it for pleasure. We read it to get together a Sunday school lesson or to have a memory verse or just some kind of something, a touchstone. They read it as a matter of life and death. And I think they have a greater appreciation as a result. I don't know about you. Pray for the folks around the world who are being persecuted. Pray for the folks in your own community who do not really have an understanding of God in the free pardon of sin. They're not saved. The gospel is not being preached in their churches. They don't understand it. Make sure that you're equipped, ready to give an answer when someone would pose the question or lead into a discussion of this sort of thing. I find in my life as I interact with people that I don't know, outside of the church, outside of my family, outside of the community of people that are my friends and so forth, there are very few people who are not interested. There are very few people who don't have questions, very few who don't know a little something, but they don't know it all. And I find that as I have discussion with them and push softly on a particular button, not necessarily a biblical button, but a social button or a relationship button or whatever, you can hear it and it starts coming out and it's like, I want to know more. In my place of employment, it is not proper for me to be preaching to people that can't get away from me. I'm driving in a van. So I try to be very careful, but it's interesting, the opportunities that you have to say something. And recognize the fact that you're not the only person in the world that God is going to or is able to use to reach these people. That you can do a little something. You can say this or that and make it work. And they'll go somewhere else and get even more information. Keep it in mind. I just blew it. I have an issue, and I just discovered my issue as I was talking. I hope I got it all in there right. My issue is my mouse just ran out of battery power, and I can't remember where I put my batteries. I got a whole bucket full of batteries. I got batteries for every occasion. I will probably find those batteries right about the time I don't need them. Right now I need them, and I don't know where they are. Where could they possibly be? I'd rob something else, but I can't think of anything else to rob. I don't know what has those batteries in it. Don't go away. Oh, well. I really don't know. And that's the sad part. Don't go away. I'll be right back. right, we're back on the air, back on the thing. You know, I'm assuming that you didn't see anything I just did. Maybe you did. I'm going to edit the whole thing out. I just can't believe it. I have a battery charger. No batteries in it. And I have about 6 or 8 batteries that I use back and forth. And right this minute, I can't lay my hands or my brain on any one of them. And they're usually laying around all over the place. It's just one of those days. Anyway, what are we talking about? Somebody's commenting about the indulgences. If indulgences were sold by the church nowadays, a splinter from the cross Jesus hung on, or a stone from the Garden of Gethsemane to get a shorter stint in purgatory for a loved one or their own self, would there be a market for them? I am given to understand that when you go into a Catholic church today and you light a candle for a dearly departed soul, a family member or whatever, that is exactly what you're doing. It's the same thing as an indulgence. You're lighting a candle, shortening their time in purgatory, or in hell, I guess. I mean, purgatory is not a whole lot better than hell. It's a place where you are put, a place of torment, where your sins are purged. That's the whole idea of purgatory. It is an ungodly, unbiblical, almost inhuman doctrine that people would come together using religion to dominate people's minds and hearts and the very soul of their being for money. But that is the sum total, some substance of the Roman Church today. Hasn't changed any. There's a big market on it, not just in Rome, everywhere. It's the way it works. I want to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in our country. We have a president who has revolutionized the office of president. It'll never be the same again. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happened. And so I've entitled this short little section, The United States under Trump. Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday night. It's November 4th, 2018. We are 2 days from our midterm elections here in the US of A. We have a new president. He has served the best part of 2 years. Under President Trump, the jobs that were created just in the last month, the month of October, totaled 250,000 jobs. Just in the last month. Right now, 156,562,000 people are employed. The current population is standing at just a little over 327.5 million. That was 11 o'clock Friday morning. About every 2 minutes it gets bigger. In 2016, there were almost 74 million children under the age of 18. I don't know what it is today. They haven't given me the statistic anywhere that I can let hold of, but it's probably a little bit more. The total number of children in the United States has grown since 1980. In 1980, there were 64 million children. But overall, it is a steadily decreasing percentage of the population. Currently, about 24% of the total population are young people. It is expected that in the year 2050, 32 years from now, the rate will be down to about 20%. In 1960, it was 36%, and that's as high as it's ever been. since they've been keeping track. What happened in 1960? Well, abortion happened. That's what happened. Beginning in the 60s, we started to see an increase, not just in abortion, but in birth control pills and other things. By the 1970s, we had a law, a federal law that allowed you to kill your baby if you wanted to. In the United States, manufacturing is up 32,000 jobs. Hispanic unemployment is at an all-time low. Wage gains are the strongest in a decade. And the approval rating for this president stands at 51%. You do realize that most presidents never get 50%, and if they do, it's only for a short stint. Most presidents hover down in the 40s. The good ones, the bad ones go lower than that. And have you noticed the gas prices are going down? Here in the Charleston area, they've dropped about 25 cents just in the last month. Experts in the field are suggesting that it will go down another 50 cents, at least in many areas. They're currently 27 cents higher than they were last year at this time. And the reason for all of this, they're telling us, is that OPEC is pumping oil at an all-time high. Why? Well, because apparently the United States doesn't need Middle East oil any longer. And President Trump has ordered certain sanctions against Iranian oil, sanctions that will begin tomorrow. And they have just been pumping their little hearts out until then. So don't look for low gas prices any day soon. I remember 25 cents. I remember how everybody screamed when it went to 26. But I also remember Jimmy Carter and the lines at the gas station. And then the odd and even days based on your license plate in the 1980s, I guess it was. The sanctions that the president has imposed means less oil, not more. And we're not geared up yet to compensate. We have more oil reserves than anybody in the world, but we're not there yet. So it's going to go up and down and back and forth, winter, summer, all of that, and get a little bit higher. Election day is Tuesday. That's 2 days from now. The Washington, D.C. City Council is preparing to vote to lower the voting age in the district to 16 years, down from 18. Anybody want to venture a guess as to why somebody, a thinking human being, would do something like this? I don't like 18. I think it ought to be 21. Maybe it ought to be 30, given some of the young people I've seen. Well, the guys there in Washington and gals say that it's to enfranchise the district's young people, bringing their voices into the political process. What do you say? Michael Moore is reported to have met with the Pope recently. In his appearance on Late Night with Seth Meyers, he said the Pope told him that capitalism is a sin and that the poor must always come first. He said the Pope told him that he wants him more to make more movies. The report is that the Pope told him to go home and go back to work. Of course, no one actually knows if any of this stuff is true. Well, why would the Pope think that capitalism is a sin? Capitalism, where people can exercise their initiative and they have the freedom and the opportunity to go to work and earn as much money as they can. How is that a sin? Well, I guess the theory is that rich people are stingy and poor people are not. But then poor people don't have anything to be stingy about, do they? And not all rich people are stingy. It just made me wonder, what in the world is going on? So I looked into it. And I want to share that with you in the next segment. My batteries are working. Everything is good. Oh. Yeah, this whole thing with Michael Moore drives me crazy. I mean, I have no real respect for Michael Moore. And as I dipped into this thing, I realized why. Some of the things he's doing and the way he's operating is just crazy. But I thought you might like to know too. So I wrote a little article that I want to share with you. Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday night and we're together. I want to talk to you a little bit about Michael Moore. Michael Moore met with the Pope, he says, recently. Michael Moore is a liberal. He's a filmmaker. He was on Seth Meyers' show, Late Night, they call it. And he said that he asked the Pope about income equality. Here's what he said. I went to the weekly audience with the Pope, and then he asked to speak to me privately. Keep in mind, nobody knows whether this is true or not. It's Michael Moore. It could be, it may not be. He says it was an amazing moment, and the Pope asked if I, Michael Moore, could ask him a question. Now I take that back. Michael asked if he could ask the Pope a question. The Pope said yes. So Michael asked the question, do you believe that an economic system that benefits the few, the wealthy, at the expense of the many, is a sin? That's the way he defines capitalism. That's how he sees it. It's not really the way it is. But here's where the story gets a little weird. Because of all the questions, a Catholic, and I'm assuming Moore is a Catholic, I don't know why he'd go see the Pope if he wasn't. Of all the questions a Catholic could ask the Pope, he asked him about capitalism. But then I think, yeah, it's Michael Moore, so I guess it's possible. But still, in a real world, this would not be the question anyone would ask the Pope. Anyway, Moore says that in asking the question, the Pope responded in Italian, saying, "Si." Again, it's me, being picky. But I wonder why an Argentine would respond to an English-speaking person in Italian, except if they are in Italy. But that's not his native language. And why would they choose any of that over English, since you're talking to someone who may not understand anything else? I don't know. Makes the story just a little bit more weird. So Moore says, quote, "So you believe capitalism, the capitalism we now have, is sin?" And the Pope says, yes, it is. Because the poor must always come first. And then the Pope grabbed Michael's hand and said, "Please pray for me." And Michael said, "I will. And please you pray for me." And the Pope says, "No. You have more movies to make. Make more movies." And Moore says, I'm like, "I just wanted a prayer." And he's like, "No, you go back. Go back and go back to work." So Michael Moore has concluded that the Pope has a sense of humor. Now keep in mind, all this took place on a late-night TV comedy show. So we don't really expect an intellectually based conversation at that hour of the night. And it's Michael Moore, a strident leftist. But think about the logic. Capitalism, people, corporations working to make a profit. Profit is the money that you use, not just to live your life, but profit is the money you have in order to help poor people if that's what you wanted to do. You don't make a profit, the poor people get no help. The more profits, the greater help you can be. You meaning the population at large. Now that's theoretical. I mean, that's just the logic of it. But even at its worst, only a capitalistic system can ever help the poor indefinitely. Think Venezuela. Think Colombia, where people are risking their lives to leave. Think of the economies around the world where people have nothing. What do they have to give? You say, well, they're poor. They don't give, they get. But they're all poor. I looked it up. The best economy in the world is Switzerland, with the United States coming in number 2. And you have to say, why is our economy number 2? Well, our economy is much, much larger. And our debt as a percentage of GDP is also much larger. Switzerland has a debt as a percentage of GDP that's 43.6%. We here in the United States, our debt is 105%. We owe more than we make. We owe more than we have by 5%. But we're not the worst economy in the world. We're number 2 of the best. Yemen is the worst economy in the world. They are currently in the midst of a civil war. They are on the brink of a famine. The next 8 nations working backward toward top 10, are all African, with Haiti being number 10. Capitalism as a monetary system is about privately or corporately owned production, with development as a proportion of reinvestment into a free market system. The Pope's home country of Argentina ranks number 26 out of the 32 nations that make up the Western Hemisphere. One of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere. And he, an Argentine, is telling a committed leftist what to do. The answer to the world's economic problems? An emphasis on personal responsibility, something that communism never does. Help those who cannot help themselves. Let the markets help all the rest. Now, that's assuming the markets have the freedom to operate without government interference and/or pressures. When you help people who can work, could make money, won't, you are actually harming that person. You are conditioning them to expect others to take care of them. If you leave people who can work, do for themselves, leave them to their own devices, they ultimately will. Why? They'll get hungry. They'll do something. Yeah, they'll start stealing. Well, then we'll put them in jail. It'll get worse. They'll learn sooner or later. Well, what if they don't learn? Well, there are incorrigible people. There are also people who haven't got a brain and cell in their body. Very small percentage of the people you run into. There are exceptions. There are people who are very industrious, very smart, and who will turn to crime rather than work. But we will just find them, arrest them, and we will put them to work. And if they don't want to work in prison, then they don't eat. They don't do anything if they don't work. And sooner or later, they'll work. That sounds terrible. It's a Bible idea. A man that won't work shouldn't eat. You shouldn't feed somebody who won't work. The law of nature will take over. If you don't eat, you'll die. See, we can't let people die. They won't die. That's just the excuse people use. The excuse that liberals use to take productive citizens' wealth away from them to give to people who could work but won't. Notice I say could. There's people that can. Anybody would help those people. This is a system that is confiscatory. It's taking. I don't have any choice. And a system that takes without choice is an immoral system. And a lot of what we do is out of our emotion, out of our sense of guilt. We have to help these people. But it isn't helpful. And it's demonstrating itself all the time. God's system is an entirely different animal. In God's system, we understand, because God tells us, that human beings, by nature, have an innate deficiency. They're selfish. Selfishness is due to our sin nature. We were born that way. And unless we are trained, motivated in another, we will gravitate into greater sin. Now, human beings cannot help from being human. It's a moral deficiency. And that's why God came to earth as a man, paying the price for that sin, providing mankind with a moral choice to know right versus wrong, to see the stark realities, and also to provide mankind with power to do right. It's called grace. But what is right? In terms of our discussion, which is economies, right is working in order to provide for yourself and your family. God said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, if a man won't work, neither should he eat. Don't feed somebody that won't work. Why? Because sin created a moral economic system whereby human beings are required to work if they want to eat. It wasn't like that in the beginning. Adam and Eve lived in a paradise. You just go pick the fruit. It was sin that created the system we're in now, where you have to work by the sweat of your brow to get the earth to produce so that you can live. The liberal, the humanistic, the socialistic system that encourages people not to work not only doesn't work, it bankrupts nations. And as such, it is a sin against God. So here we have a man telling a comedian on a comedy show that the supreme leader of the largest so-called Christian religion of the world told him that God's program is sin. And given Michael Moore's political orientation, that socialism is the answer. So you ask, how much of your millions, Mr. Moore, have you given to people in your neighborhood who won't work? Or people in your purview, people in your world? These people refuse to work. So how many millions of dollars have you given to that program to help them stay in that situation? Well, I looked to see what kind of giving Michael Moore does, and it's public knowledge. He gives money to help people. One website lists adoption, fostering children, orphans, AIDS, and HIV. He gives to children, to education, to health programs and poverty programs, and weapons reduction. But the only charity he seems to actually support with money is something called simply Malawi. M-A-L-A-W-I. It's an organization that helps orphans in Malawi. They provide water, food, medical care, and schooling. As best I can ascertain, the other charitable efforts are public appearances and celebrity announcements. Michael Moore has the opportunity to hire working-class people and minorities for his various projects. However, the website newsofinterest.tv reports that he rarely does. Not for the high-level jobs. Not for jobs that actually pay good salaries. Here he hires entertainment industry veterans with previous high-level experience. End of quote. Now keep in mind, that's smart. It's just not consistent with his rhetoric and public persona. A public persona which is largely bogus. He has been found to exaggerate his foundation's donations, giving only the minimum amounts. He funded environmental projects near property he owned, which therefore improved his property values. Now, I happen to think that's smart, but it's certainly not politically correct, which would then paint Michael Moore as a hypocrite. In his own book entitled Downsize This, Moore claims that every business, including his own, should always involve labor unions. However, he is known to dissuade employees from joining unions, not giving writers proper credit, and moving film production out of the country to save on production costs. Now, it's explained that Moore is well known for being obsessed with money. I got it. I'm not giving it to just anybody. In 2014, his wife of 23 years filed for divorce. The filings listed, quote, multiple substantial residences and multiple companies, end of quote, as assets. One was what is being called the Northern Michigan Mansion. Pictures of it resemble a luxury hotel rather than a home for two people. This man of the people has lived the life of a one-percenter as long as he's been on this planet. And this is the man who wants the nation to embrace communism. Socialism, as if we could tell the difference. Were we to do this, doesn't he realize his mansions would be at risk? He couldn't have these things. Now, he could have been using his wealth to create jobs for all those he views as victims of immoral capitalism. But he hasn't. He didn't. He doesn't. And without capitalism, Michael Moore would be just as poor as everybody else. Without capitalism, there is no money for the poor. Now, there are legitimate poor. These are people who cannot. But we have a world full of deliberate poor. These are people who will not. They don't have to. Mom and dad took care of them. Their friends will take care of them. For the guys, they'll find girlfriends that'll take care of them. And when all else fails, the government will take care of them. The deliberate poor tend to remain so. And they remain this way largely because of liberalism's need for victims. It's almost deliberate on the part of the socialists in our political system. Michael Moore, I think he's lying. I don't think the Pope said anything like it. Do you? Halloween's over. I don't begrudge it. We weren't here. Halloween fell on Wednesday this year. I don't know about you, but I'm in church on Wednesday nights. Our church does what a lot of churches, I don't know if it's just in the South, it may be other places as well. I've heard about it for years. I've never lived anywhere where it was actually practiced. But it's something called trunk or treat. And it's usually done in our church on a Wednesday night close to Halloween. The Wednesday before or something. Well, this year we got to do it right on one. And the idea is that kids would dress up, and go out and whatever. But, they come over to the church. People back their cars up to the church, open their trunks. They got all kinds of stuff in there. It keeps them off the streets, keeps them from going out and doing crazy things, getting hurt maybe, or maybe even just having to buy these grotesque costumes and getting into all this other stuff. And Halloween has become that holiday, if you will, that has just been abused for years. I'll say well over a decade, maybe 20 years now. You and I both have had children come to the door, cute little kids. They got the little baskets their mom and dad is out there. But we get these teenagers that come. They got nothing. They got maybe a mask, and that's it, but they got a bag, and they want you to fill it up. And I'm of a mind not to. I don't go to the door. I don't deal with it. But if I did, they wouldn't get anything. I say, you know what? Come back tomorrow. I got a chore out back. You do that, I'll give you all the candy you want. They're just using me. But they'd firebomb my house. I don't know. But Halloween has become a problem for the liberals. I want to explain it to you. Welcome to the Bible Forum. It is November 4th, 2018. Halloween's over. Got by us just a couple of days back, 4 or 5 days ago. But I wanted to share something with you about Halloween. How it has perhaps become a problem for the leftists. Bill Maher, you know Bill Maher, liberal leftist talk show host, recently pointed to what he calls a liberal trap when it comes to Halloween. This from ChristianHeadlines.com. He is reported to have said, quote, "The office of scolding social justice warriors has decreed no hula girls, no Indian chiefs, no Southern belles, no Daniel Boone, no geishas, ninjas, gypsies, mobsters, terrorists, and no Cleopatra as Halloween costumes. You see, pirates offend one-eyed people. You can't dress up as a hobo because it makes light of the homeless. You can't dress as Quasimodo because it offends hunchbacks. You can't dress as an escaped mental patient because it offends Kanye West." That was not nice. Kanye West, when we talked about a couple of weeks ago, he was in the office of the president And he waxed eloquent about how wonderful all this stuff is that Trump is doing and on. And I told you that he has a mental disorder. He has a condition. And this is what was driving that. He was in a manic phase. But he was good. I mean, I play it again, Sam. Well, in the last week or so, Kanye has denounced his support for Donald Trump. He says that he was deceived. Who deceived him? Look a little closer and the truth starts to creep out through the cracks. Since he did that, his clothing line has suffered financial losses. Offers to work, entertainment, and the like have gotten a little less proficient out there. His friends, not only just backing off, they're going after him. And I say so much for commitment to reality. But Maher also pointed to outrage over the recent sexy Handmaid's Tale costume that costume vendors and retailers yanked from shelves because people were outraged by what they called the ironic take of a character that doesn't exist from a fictional world that never happened. Now, not having seen the costume, I'm still betting it was about modesty. But Maher went on saying not everything that merely alludes to another culture is racist or culturally inappropriate. Halloween has always been fun because it wasn't politically correct. Not being PC was almost the whole point of the holiday, but now everything has to be turned into a federal case of snowflakes versus humor. He went on to point to a study that reveals 80% of Americans were completely turned off by the PC culture. You would not know that watching the news. The majority of America is with the Democrats on the issues. They just find the woke people, those are the people who have completely sold out to PC, liberal, and modest philosophies, they find the woke people irritating, Maher said. Nobody likes you, including the so-called marginalized groups whose feelings you decide need protecting. And when did the liberals become the fun police? Did anybody remember when it was the conservatives? We went from yes we can to oh no you didn't. Bill Maher. But Bill Maher is something of a political enigma. Politically, Maher doesn't want to be put in any categories. He calls himself a politically practical person. At the same time, he seems to be offended by the use of the word liberal. He seems to see it as a derogatory term. Now, Maher sits on the board of directors of, quote, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, end of quote. He endorsed Kerry over Bush for president, as well as Obama. He gave $1 million to Obama's 2012 campaign. Oh, and he opposed the Iraq War. You know, the one where ISIS was killing everybody in sight and threatening to dominate the Middle East and destroy Israel. You remember those people? At the same time, Maher is an outspoken advocate for Western values. And I say, you can't have it both ways, Bill. Bill said, I'm someone who believes in the values that Western people believe in that a lot of the Muslim world does not, like separation of church and state. How do we pick that one out? You know, like equality of the sexes. Of course, he meant genders. Like respect for minorities, free elections, free speech, freedom to gather. These things are not just different from cultures that don't have them. They're better. Bill says, I'd like to keep those values here. Well, I got a news flash for Mr. Bill. These are largely all biblical values. You know, the biblical, the principles of Western civilization, and it comes with rules. Rules like, thou shalt not murder unborn children in the womb. Thou shalt not lie, cheat, steal. Thou shalt not spend more money than you take in. Thou shalt not tax people into poverty. Thou shalt not tell people how they can talk, walk, and vote. It comes with a healthy appreciation, a healthy respect for the one true God of the universe, meaning, thou shalt not take his name in vain. I can't imagine he likes that. And he does get the last say. Like not glorifying public nudity, meaning demeaning the human form, making it something that it was not intended to be, not changing the immutable laws of nature and of God. However, to adopt all these, quite honestly, biblical values would be considered intrusive by the liberal crowd. They would be considered a violation of our basic freedoms. You know, the freedom to be ignorant and profane. Yeah. Oh well. One of the things that we're facing, and you see it and hear about it all the time, because it's not over till it's over, and it's not over. And it's all about the border. It's all about these folks that are lined up for about 4 miles in a line coming toward our southern border. They're not traipsing up the eastern side of Mexico and into South Texas. They're coming right straight up to Southern California and Arizona and those areas. They're coming because they believe they have a right to be part of our country. They're just going to walk in. They're coming because where they are is so untenable. It is almost unlivable. And we've got people here, and I honestly believe they're being motivated by others, but that's another story. And we've got people here who are upset with a president who says that just because somebody sneaks in under the wire across the river over the fence into our country and has a baby does not mean that baby gets to be a citizen of this country. It's a battle over the 14th Amendment. And you've heard that discussion. And you've heard lawyers, politicians, educators, other reasonably intelligent individuals telling us that if he does this, it's a violation of the 14th Amendment. And I'm here to tell you, it ain't so. I want to talk to you about it. You need to have this information as one of the weapons in your quiver, one of the arrows in your quiver. It ain't going to go away any day soon. Hi, you're on the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night to talk to you about life from a biblical perspective. Very often I find people writing, responding to things that I've said, saying, you know, as the Bible shows the Bible, you ought not be talking about politics, you ought not be talking about finance, all that. The Bible talks about all these things, and we always take what the Bible says and hold it up next to what the world is doing as an illustration. So it's perfectly normal. Right now, one of the big issues that's pushing people, and there's a lot of conversation about it, is the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment guarantees our basic rights. It prohibits states from passing and or enforcing laws that abridge our privileges and or our immunities. It guarantees basic rights like depriving any person their life, their liberty, or their property without due process. It protects against denying any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the law. The persons that are being discussed here are citizens of these United States. And the question today seems to be just who are citizens? People born in this country, are they citizens? Or people born within the confines of these United States? A Fox News commentator by the name of Michelle Malkin is warning against the increase in disease arising from the illegal aliens crossing our southern border. Now, the truth is, according to the Centers for Disease Control, quote, most experts agree that testing for tuberculosis, hepatitis B, and HIV should be performed for most new arrivals to the United States. Clinicians should also make a habit of ensuring that this screening has been done for every new non-U.S. born patient they see, regardless of time since the person's arrival. This is part of a CDC report. But at the same time, actual public health experts across the Southwest have reported a rise in drug-resistant TB, a rise in dengue fever. And it's not just a unique situation. In June, Australian public health researchers reported that scabies, long considered a disease of the past in the developed world, is making its way back. The scientists pointed to mass global migration as a leading factor, noting scabies outbreaks among refugees to the European Union and along America's southern border. In Germany, federal epidemiologists reported that since opening the floodgates to migrants in 2015, data show, quote, increased incidences in Germany of adenoviral conjunctivitis. Also, 33 serious, many communicable diseases are being reported. Things you may not have even heard of. Botulism, chickenpox, cholera, cryptosporidiosis, dengue fever, echinococcus. Didn't say that right, but it's too many C's and O's. Enterohemorrhagic E. coli. Giardia, I can't pronounce that one. I can't manage the influenza, hantavirus, hepatitis, hemorrhagic fever, HIV, AIDS, leprosy, louse-borne relapsing fever, malaria, measles, meningococcal disease, meningoencephalitis, mumps, paratyphoid, rubella, shigellosis, syphilis, toxoplasmosis, tuberculosis, tularemia, typhus, and whooping cough. Things that the Western world hasn't dealt with in 1,000 years. Here at home, the argument is about our 14th Amendment, which most Americans believe gives the children of foreign nationals born in the United States the right to citizenship just simply because they've been born here. Now, the truth, as usual, is, well, inconvenient. You see, the 14th Amendment repudiated the Dred Scott decision of 1857. This ruling of the Supreme Court, this Dred Scott ruling, legalized the idea that a black person, even if born free, could not claim rights of citizenship under the federal Constitution. And so under the 14th Amendment, they changed all that. That amendment states, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. It views, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdictions thereof to be citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. End of discussion. No. The intent of this amendment was to stop state governments from discriminating against black Americans. And it played a key role in many landmark civil rights cases. It was originally designed to protect the rights of slaves in the South after the Civil War. Now fast forward to the 1960s, to the Lyndon Johnson era. In the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Congress drew on the 14th Amendment's prohibition of making or enforcing any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. The next year, it was used to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Today, the protections of this law are being extended to people who are in this country unlawfully. Advocates are equating this to traveling families, vacationing in this country, and then birthing a child. If you were a citizen of another nation and you came here for vacation, your child was born here, is that child a U.S. citizen? Well, if you're in the Western Hemisphere, the answer is yes. Now, ironically, the only nation that doesn't do that is Colombia. And all these people coming for Colombia. If you are somewhere else, if you go to a country other than a Western civilization, can you do that? No. Is this the same as sneaking into a country? Swimming across the border? Climbing a fence? Hiding in a truck? No. All of those activities mark you not as a traveler, but as a criminal. You're not a visitor. You're not an immigrant. And the law is intended for those who legally migrate or have vacationing here. We have untold millions of very poor people living thousands of miles away, not connected by a land bridge to the richest nation in the world, meaning the US of A. The leadership of their countries are slowly squeezing their economies to death, impoverishing more and more ordinary people. From the outside, it appears the leadership of these countries don't care about anyone who isn't wealthy. It takes a truly hard-hearted person to not feel sorry for these people. Not the wealthy ones, the poor ones. But at the same time, the United States cannot feed, house, and provide jobs, medical care, and security to 2 billion people who have needs and sneak in, swim across the border, fight their way in. And America is a nation of laws. Meaning if you apply for asylum or you apply to immigrate here, we will consider your application and your circumstances. If you rush the gate, you flood over the border, you're a criminal. The laws as they stand no doubt factor all this in. The lawmakers, sympathetic to the plight of these people, are risking great harm to this country by setting those laws aside under the guise of this mythical 14th Amendment. I say mythical because it exists, but not the way they say it does. But that is exactly what we have done for the last 60 years or so, ever since a liberal Democrat president and administration redefined the 14th Amendment to include wetbacks and anyone else who managed to sneak in. The president of that day was Lyndon Johnson. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld this law, even as it legitimized criminals. Why? Well, it was an emotional issue, and it was a voting issue. And the Supreme Court, no doubt, was dominated by liberals, political liberals. There's a great difference between immigrants lawfully being granted entry and people simply overwhelming the borders and flooding in. And if you can't see the difference, you're admitting to a serious mental deficiency. Or being plain ignorant of this law and the application, or you've got an ulterior motive. If the liberals cared about these people and their poverty, they would not work as hard as they do to impoverish the average legal citizens within their districts with confiscatory laws. But then there's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act, which quickly followed. The next 45 years saw a liberal Democrat Congress consistently passing more and more giveaway laws to keep their new voting bloc both happy and in the fold. What was passed as a morally necessary law quickly became a great drain on society, and the communities that seemed to suffer the greatest were those the liberals and progressives seemed to love the most. I believe that President Trump will no doubt follow through with his plan. It'll be very interesting to see how the High Court rules this time around. Should the Supreme Court rule in favor of Trump, look for a chorus of "I told you so's" to echo from the left side of the aisle and across this land. Those who complain the loudest will often be those who benefited the most from this twisted view of the 14th Amendment that we have just come to accept, but was never real. Adults are parenting the family. They're trying to put it back where it belongs. I pray they will. I give you this information because it's going to get a little bit crazy over the next several months, maybe years, as this thing moves forward. And you got to stop listening to your president when he just talks off the top of his head. He wants the army to go down there and shoot these people. He didn't say that, but it was implied in an off-the-cuff comment. When he was challenged on it, he backed off. And of course, the military says we don't do that. But what started out to be 5,000 soldiers at the border is now upwards of 10 to 15,000. And they do have smoke and other kinds of deterrents. They've got beanbag guns, and they've got other kinds of things they can do to stop people. But the real thing that fascinates me is the pictures of people wading across, presumably at low tide, a small body of water, maybe 100 yards wide, between Mexico and Texas. They just all line up. They're just wading across and they're coming in. And it almost looks like nobody's stopping them. Well, all these other people are coming up here. Tijuana. Coming up to Southern California. Those people are making a statement. They don't even know they're doing it. Somebody is pushing that. That is immoral. They don't care how many of those people die. And I bet you money, some people have died on this trip. People who would not have died had they not got on this trip. And they've been promised all sorts of things. They've been told, no doubt, all they have to do is get across that border and they're in. It's not true. It's not true. Abortion is about to create a serious problem for Democrats. It's one of their signature issues. It's going to blow up in their face. I want to show you how. I want to share it with you. Welcome to the Bible Forum. An abortion researcher is predicting a really tough time for Democrats over the next 40 years. This from a column in WorldNet Daily, I believe, .com, a fellow by the name of Dennis Howard. He equates the desperation of the Democrats to the guy falling past the 50th floor on the Empire State Building while assuring himself, so far so good. And the issue is abortion in America and what that has yielded. Tracking abortion numbers since 1992, this former Democrat is finding a truly bad track record for the future of the liberal cause. It seems liberals, Democrats mostly, have been killing their offspring in large numbers over these many decades. And in so doing, they're killing off their potential voting base. Now that's a simple logical equation that you, oh yeah, but it's really not like. A market researcher, former Democrat, Mr. Howard says he can confidently predict, based on abortion trends, that the Democrats are just about finished as a national party for the next 30 to 40 years. He says for decades, Democrats, the liberal sort, have been able to pander to minorities, women, using those voting blocks to build majorities that were insurmountable by the rest of the electorate. He points out that Republicans have needed 65% of the votes simply to break even against the Democrat voting blocks of women and minorities, which has had as much as 10 million vote advantages just among the African American community. But something that has now appeared to have evaporated. And why? He says largely due to abortion on demand. It is estimated, he says, that 61 million Americans have died at the hands of abortionists over the last 60 plus years, all of them less than a year old. It is this, Mr. Howard says, that will decide the future of the Democrat Party. Now, these people all say Democratic Party. I hate that, because the Democrat Party is anything but democratic. And democratic does not define or describe what the Democrats are. He provides some facts. Fact number one, he says 25 states, mainly Republican, have had 10% of these abortions, while the other 25 states account for 90% of all abortions. The top 12 Democrat states are responsible for 73% of all the abortions that we've had. He said this is what defeated Hillary in the last election. New Jersey, New York, Illinois, Michigan, Massachusetts, liberal states collectively lost 9 electoral votes due simply by population decline. These are all cold states, by the way. The cold up there. Not like a whole lot of people are going to flock up there. While in Texas, Florida, and Georgia, electoral votes increased by 6 due to population. And all 3, Texas, Florida, Georgia, voted for Trump in 2016. 5 states, Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina, voted Obama in 2012. But they all switched to Trump in 2016. And this cost Hillary 103 electoral votes. He suggests that if things continue as they have, Republicans, conservatives, will continue to win elections in these states. New York has more abortions per year than it has deaths. And that's deaths from any and every other cause. The majority of these abortions are among minority populations. Black births in New York City dropped 50% between 1990 and 2010. Blue-collar families in upstate red counties just kept having babies. It's going to take a while, he says, but sooner or later, that piper's going to get paid. Fact number 2, catering to women on issues like abortion appears on the surface to give Democrats a 24-point lead among women compared to an 8-point edge for Republicans among men. At least that's what the pollsters say. But the demographics of abortion turn that fact upside down. Because the truth is, half of all aborted babies are females who will never get a chance to vote. And that means more missing voters and declining margins for the Democrats. To estimate the impact on this future voting, this particular market researcher adjusted for the fact that you have to be 18 years old to vote and the fact that only 60% actually vote. And given those adjustments, the 2016 total of 61 million abortions adds up to 26 million missing voters, divided more or less evenly between men and women. However, in accounting for the differences in how both sexes vote, it means that Hillary's margin would have been cut by 3 million votes in 2016, while Trump would have lost only 1 million. Net loss, 2 million votes for Hillary. Fact number 3. Nationally, abortion has taken the lives of 21 million future black voters. At least 14 million of these would be voting age today. If they had voted like other blacks in 2016, Hillary would have won by 6 million votes. This is a very high price to pay for pandering over the last 25 or so years. But the real cost has been to lives. The black population growth in the U.S. has declined from 1.7% a year before 2000 to a mere 0.52% in the 18 years since. That's a 69% decline. Fewer black people being born. 69%. Today, the black population hovers around 43 million out of a total population of more than 327 million. That's less than 8% of the population. Without abortion, that number would have been 73 million higher. The U.S. Supreme Court never considered the carnage that this right, so-called right, would bring. They only considered that people had a right to kill their unborn children. They weren't really human. And those who have paid the highest price are among the poorest and among the minority populations. these numbers, these percentages, are right up there with slavery and the Nazi Holocaust. What those butchers did is no different in result than what our liberal, I care for you legislators have done. Fact number 4, similar analysis of younger voters, 18 to 49, confirms both the short and long-term impact of abortion on current and future voting. This is the group that's been the hardest hit by the abortion toll, which has taken the lives of 28% of the population under 50. The 18 to 29 group voted heavily for Hillary in 2016, and the older segments, not so much. But altogether, these missing younger voters would have contributed an additional margin of 3 million votes for Hillary in 2016, more than enough to guarantee a victory. Now, all this doesn't include another 22 million missing voters under 18. These are potential voters who just don't vote. They represent a loss of another 1.3 million edge for the Democrats in future national elections. Nor did it include any allowance for the expected echo effect, the future voters who would otherwise have been born to those who were aborted. No matter how you look at it, all of these aborted babies are making a big difference today and will continue to make an even bigger difference over the next 40 to 50 years as the cumulative total of abortions and their echo effect on the future generations continues to climb. And nobody can stop this, not even Hillary. The supreme irony is that America's aborted generation of 61 million is making a growing difference by no longer being around to vote like a block for those who promoted abortion as the answer to all the world's ills. Their voices are not lost. You see, the silence speaks for them and will continue to do so. Have hope. It wonders me how long somebody has to read, study, do research to come up with that kind of statistic. It's possible with computers it don't take that long at all, but that's pretty in-depth and forward thinking, the analysis, the logic, and knowing how these people operate. They do this and then they bounce it off other people to see if they're telling it, if it's working. At least I hope that's what this fellow did. He is a self-described Democrat, so it is highly likely it's exactly what he did. I've got a rather lengthy discussion here on the issue of sin. It started out with the idea that this would kind of be a Sunday sermon. Didn't end up that way exactly. In fact, I'm not sure it ended up where it had set out to end up. Sometimes these articles kind of take on a life of their own. But I want to share that with you. It's the last thing I'm going to do tonight, but it's a lengthy thing. It's about 7 pages long. Everything else I've done has been about 3, 4 maybe, something like that. What in the world, John? Why are you agreeing with Russ? You have to be careful. Let me see what he's doing here. See what I mean? You see what I mean? For those of you who aren't in the chat room, shame on you. But the question came up, what do you think of Roe v. Wade? Russ says, I don't think we should allow any of them in either by rowing or wading across the Rio Grande. And John says, I agree with you, Russ. I agree. Did you see the article in the Forbes magazine about the IRS allowing illegal aliens, advising aliens to use Social Security numbers that are not their own? No, I did not. Shoot me a link to that. I'd like to see that. That is corruption within the federal system. The people there in Washington. IRS. Find out who did that. Fire that. Put him in jail. You know, we're finding out as we go along the corruption, the chaos, the deliberateness of folks in the federal government system, the worker bees, you know, the people that are getting salaries to do stuff. We're finding out that a lot of these people work around the edge. They keep telling us that even within the White House there are sleeper agents, people who feign support for the Donald but are working against him. And I suppose that that is normal and logical. I mean, the federal government is huge. I don't think that you can keep track of all those people. And, you know, just because something's happened, you have to have proof. You got a whole army of people theoretically trying to ferret out these ferrets in the group. I hope they're doing some of that, but it's a monumental job. And because human beings are sinful creatures by nature, it'll continue. I think what we're watching, what we're seeing now is the result of our religious evolution. Going back 100 years ago and watching various strong Christian religious groups steadily weakening in their stance, in their doctrine, in their beliefs, in their values, in their integrity. You know, weakening, until now we just have, I don't even know what to call them anymore, so-called churches, where some guy who's making far more money than he deserves stands up and gives a motivational speech with a Bible verse attached to it, and everybody thinks it's the most wonderful thing in the world. But at the same time, they're introducing ungodly musical forms into the system, calling them worship tunes. Ungodly in the sense that they're cacophonous, or ungodly in the sense that they're emotionalized, and people are swaying back and forth and they're just going into a zone. And then there are the people on the stage, and oftentimes, not often, but you can see at times where the gyrations, the antics that are going on the stage are not godly. And then you look at the private lives of the preachers and those that are in leadership, and you just want to go someplace else. I want to carve out a little spot in the country, you know, a warm spot, and put all those that really believe God in it, and put everybody else up along the Canadian border where it's cold. You know. Maybe it'd slow them down a little bit. I don't know. But it's not going to work. The issue is sin in the species. Stay with me. These are the wrong glasses. No, they're not. They're the right glasses. I have glasses I just look at the screen with. And then I have glasses that I don't need. You know, it's fast getting to the place where I don't need to go back and forth. What does that mean? Probably means my eyes are getting worse. Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse here on the Bible Forum. It's November 4, 2018. And I have an article. It's probably under the heading of a Sunday sermon, but it's not heavily fortified with Bible verses and the like. But the principles are there. And I've entitled it, The Issue of Sin in the Species. There are very few people in the world who were not thoroughly shocked last week when a man walked into a synagogue on a Sabbath day and started shooting everybody in sight. We were shocked by this wanton destruction where people had gathered to worship God. We are shocked when men kill their children and their wives, bury them in a field, and then feign remorse and shock at their so-called abduction, only to find out later that they were the culprits. Or when men and women spend huge amounts of money to change the way they look, from men to women or from women to men, having the surgeries to make it look as real as possible. And we're more shocked when they insist on being addressed by their new gender identity. And even more shocked when seemingly sane people, doctors, psychologists, preachers, and others go along with this nonsense. What's going on? Well, what's going on is what has always been going on. And that is that this world is moving toward moral, spiritual, and physical disaster and demise. Why? Because of sin. Sin is a corrupter. Sin is a destructor. And sin was permitted into the system and into human beings back at the beginning. Now, the idea of sin in the Bible is that of transgression, a violation of law, a violation of command, a violation of duty. Specifically, it's the transgression of God's revealed word. God has brought forth, thus saith the Lord. You deliberately ignore it, you transgress against it, you violate it, it's called a sin. But generally, all violation of known laws, rules, social, moral, legal, in our world are also sins. Initially, according to the Bible, it had to do with eating the fruit of one particular tree in the garden that God had provided for these people. As the Bible is read, we find the most common idea for sin is that of an offense, followed by missing the mark. Those are the two most dominant definitions for the word that is translated sin. Today we've become accustomed to the idea of sin. It is a very real and present burden for those who care. How many times do we feel sorry for what we've said or thought or felt? How many times have we felt sorry that we cannot do what pleases God every day, every time? That's something that plagues the average true Christian. But it plagues others as well, people who have been raised with an objective sense of right and wrong. When they know they have done wrong, it bothers them. But in the general population, even in the so-called Christian America, it's an idea that is being slowly eroded. Some of the most ungodly people in this world will stand in front of a camera or stand in front of you and insist that they are Christians, or at least good people, despite the testimony of their life, and at the same time spouting all sorts of vile terminology and or living in what the Bible calls sin, and they never once become aware of the irony of all that. What's wrong? The Bible answer to that question is the sin nature. That natural inclination to do wrong that all of us were born with. Yes, babies sin. Not knowingly at those very young ages, but they sin just the same. They do it when they act in selfish ways. Well, they don't know. Doesn't matter. When they throw a temper tantrum. Temper tantrums are usually deliberate efforts to get their own way. When they strike out at others, wanting to hurt that other person, either physically or emotionally. I hate you. But parents look at them and say, well, they don't really know what they're doing. I would agree if they're no more than a couple of months old. But a 6-month-old child knows exactly what they're doing. And they very often know that what they're doing is wrong. Now, that assumes they have parents who are actually parenting them, which is becoming less and less real. At very young ages, mothers will tell their babies to stop that. That the baby does not stop that is where sin comes in. Not doing what we're told, not obeying authority, not caring that you may be hurting someone, insisting on having what you want, regardless of who has it or who needs it, screaming as though you're injured when you're just simply trying to manipulate your mom and dad. And all of that is normal for all human beings. But it was not always that way. There was a time, God tells us, when people didn't do things like this. When was that? In the Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. That was the day everything was good, meaning godly, right, in harmony with our God. Good, beautiful, best, better, bountiful, cheerful, at ease, fine, good, graciously, joyful, kindly, loving, merry, pleasant, pleasing, precious, sweet, well-favored. Everything? Everything. And then it changed. Sin entered the system. We're told in Genesis chapter 3 that Lucifer, the devil, the fallen archangel of light, had become the prince of darkness due to his own selfishness, his own sin, the sin of rebellion. And all sin is a form of rebellion. He sought to rise above that place where God created him to be. And in so doing, he manifested, he acted out the pride that was in his own heart. A pride that told him that he was just as good as God, maybe better. That he could do what God did. That he could rule and reign over the universe just as good or better than God. We read about it in Isaiah chapter 14. verses 13 and 14. Thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. In every assertion came the I will. And that's the essence of sin. Whether it's Satan or whether it's me. Now keep in mind the ease with which Satan got Eve to partake of the forbidden fruit. It was called forbidden fruit because God had forbidden it. Or so Adam had told her. You see, Eve did not hear this prohibition from God. She heard it from her husband. And when Adam is brought into the narrative in Genesis chapter 3, instead of standing up and saying no, he follows her leadership. She ate it and handed it to him. And he did too. Now, there are several issues here. One is, as I already mentioned, Eve did not receive the prohibition from God. But apparently Adam had told her about it because she knew that we ought not to eat that. When she offered the fruit to Adam, the text merely says that she merely handed it to him, meaning that he may have been standing there the whole time, waiting to see what would happen to her. We don't know. But there's no record of her searching for Adam, calling to it. No, she just handed it to him. And when they sinned, when they did the only thing they could do in rebellion against God, they immediately knew things had changed. The Bible says their eyes were opened, meaning that they now saw what they had done as sin. Reality struck. But they also saw that they were naked before one another. They'd never noticed that before. And the implications are both ironic and dramatic. They were changed in a moment on the inside. And as one result, they saw the other in a different light and were immediately ashamed, something they'd never experienced before. Shame, guilt, fear, embarrassment. All of these new experiences, new feelings. But what was the extent of that change? It was not what God did in driving them out of the garden, making them forage for their own food and so forth. But rather it was in the men who were born to them, their children, Cain and Abel. The narrative tells us that the time came when they were expected to offer sacrifice to God on their own behalf. They had come of age. Some assume that that time of coming of age was the same for both. The narrative doesn't make a distinction, which means they may have been twins. But the text doesn't go that far. Only that each son reached an age in years when they were to stand on their own before God. No doubt Adam told them about it. You got to do this on your own, guys, from now on. And each one offered a sacrifice. Cain's was not accepted because it was of this earth, and the earth was corrupted. He was a gardener. He was fruits and vegetables guy, and he offered the best of what he had. But it was of the earth. Abel's sacrifice was accepted, primarily because it's what God had prescribed. It was blood from an innocent lamb. Something Cain knew. He'd lived in his father's house and seen it many times. He knew. he was rebelling against God. And in these two men, we see the breakdown of people throughout the world and down through the ages. Men, women of the earth versus men and women of God. So what does it take to obey God? It takes a desire that transcends personal desire. Why? Well, because we are innately sinners. Sin is indigenous to our nature. The word sin means missing the mark. And you don't have to miss it by a mile. You can miss it by just a hair. A miss is as good as a mile, is what they say. When Cain's offering was rejected, God spoke to Cain, saying, "Why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen?" Genesis 4:7. The implication is it doesn't have to be this way. God went on to say, if you do well, if you offer the proper sacrifice, will you not be accepted? And the obvious answer was yes. However, God said, if you do not well, then sin, the offense, lieth at the door, the opening place, and unto thee shall be his desire. Implying that this is a being, not just simply a feeling. It's a condition, apparently, that is signaled to the enemy of your soul that you're fair game. And the implication was here, if you do not do well, he will have you. Now, it's that simple. Either you will take charge and not do what he wants, or he will have control over you. A little, in certain ways, at first, but in time, without knowing it, you will be moving in his direction. Sin will be your natural desire, natural inclination. As you age, you won't even notice just how far you've moved. You won't notice how far you are moving away from God's holy standards. It's about not paying attention. It may be about not being able to see it. It's about following the physical, the earthly patterns. At heart, you will be convinced that you're a good person because you can name any number of people that are worse than you. You don't lie. You don't cheat. You don't steal. You don't cuss. You don't fornicate or murder people. But you do rebel against authority. Don't like to be told what to do. You do cut the corners. You do tell people how you feel about what they're saying and doing. You do lie about your homework or where you've been. You do watch things you know you shouldn't. You do listen to music that stimulates your senses in destructive ways. And you sneak things. You rebel against authority. You don't tell the whole truth. In short, as you age, unless you're paying attention and being proactive, you are conditioned toward sin, exercising little or no resistance toward it incrementally. And the reason is because that's how you've been made. You are a son, a daughter of Adam and Eve. It's part of your DNA. In what we call Western civilization, these tendencies have been addressed in our legal documents and in our moral standards. Here in the United States, our laws are influenced by and oriented toward God's absolute standards of morality, at least the first 100 years or so. Much is made of our slave history during these years, something decidedly not biblical. The Bible clearly speaks out against slavery. Because of this slave history, critics tell us that these United States were never godly, that they were always ungodly, and they are even now. But the truth is, our founding fathers made a pact with the devil, as it were. In order to keep the southern states in the Union, which was important at the beginning, the issue of slavery was set aside. Check the documents. They were aware of it. They didn't like it. They didn't want it. But if they made a point, wouldn't get the southern states to side with them, the weakness would have destroyed them. Read the documents, the letters. You'll see that the goal of our government was always to deal with it later. And true to what the founders knew, the issue split the Union. The war to bring the Confederate States back into the Union was bitter. It threatened everything they had built, everything we were at that time. And in the hearts of some, it's a wound that has never healed. But the truth is that Western civilization, as a phrase, as a term, is a euphemism for biblical government, a form of biblical government. Our Declaration of Independence starts out with it, saying we hold these truths to be self-evident. Like what? That all men are created equal. Where does it say that? Bible. That as such they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, rights you can't take away from them. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit, not the actual guarantee. And this word happiness in their vocabulary was not happy giddy. It had more to do with the ability to act out and accomplish whatever you had in mind. We are married by Christian clergy and buried by the same. Family is the building block of society. One man, one woman, in holy matrimony until death separates us. These are Bible ideas. Our children were educated in schools where the Bible was one of the textbooks and where they learned to read according to a system called phonics and used biblical principles to illustrate. They learned the letter A, and they learned that in Adam's fall we sinned all. It's how you pronounce the letter A. And they learned to pray in school. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray thee, Lord, my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take. They learned these things in school. Benjamin Harris's 1690 New England Primer. In my day, we started every day in school with a reading from the Bible, a paragraph or so from the Old Testament, because there were Jews in our community and in the country. And then there was the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, followed by the salute to the flag, which, when I was in school, got changed with the phrase "under God" added to it. The United States, however, was never fully Christian, but it was founded on Christian principle. And because of this, we understood what sin was. We understood what evil was. As men rose up who would not live by the law, we stood up against those people. And every American knew they were safe in their homes and in their neighborhoods because, generally speaking, every American shared the same values. When I was a child, people didn't lock the doors in their houses even at night. They could go on vacation and maybe not lock the door. when I was a kid, cars had keys in them. My dad had a 49 Chevy. You didn't even need a key. You needed a key to unlock it, but then it had a little toggle at the bottom and you just get in and move it. And I never thought about anybody taking the car. There were exceptions, but largely in the cities. There were exceptions in what we now call the robber barons of industry. And then World War I, that opened the door for ordinary men to see that kind of carnage, that kind of evil, and to see Europe. Experiences that changed many a heart. And we sang the song, how you gonna keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? Prohibition came in about that time, introducing the average person to organized crime. It's on the radio, in the movies. The movies glorified it. The newspapers loved it. And as a nation, we were changing. And then came the Great Depression, and that didn't help. After World War II, men who fought in that war, men who grew up during the Great Depression with little or nothing, found themselves in an economic boom. They could get good jobs, make money. Jobs were plentiful. The pay was good. Sears and Roebuck was selling prefab houses. They delivered them to your house for $6,000. That was a lot of money in those days, about 2 years' salary probably or more. And Levitt towns were growing up all over the Northeast. Life was good. But it was about to change forever. No one anticipated a time when young people would have as much freedom as they do today. Freedom without restraint. Instant communication with anyone they choose, whenever they choose. A window on the world, 24 hours a day. The uncontrolled world of cell phones and tweets, where they would be exposed to all sorts of things they're not ready to fully understand. And the result of all of this, a society without a culture. Families without communal values. Communities that are more digital than physical. Churches that have become entertainment, and debt no one could ever have imagined. Looking around, we are hard-pressed to understand why so many people have so many disparate ideas and values, why so many people have so much time to spend on the streets in protest of one thing or another, why so many don't seem to have any roots or any real community, and why there is so much violence. And the common answer on the superficial level is that we are no longer a neighborhood. We are no longer a common society. We are now 360 million different people interacting with whatever presents itself at the moment. Facebook, Twitter, and a host of newer social media outlets have become our reality. So now a man can walk into a Jewish synagogue and simply kill a bunch of people he doesn't even know for nothing more than they're Jewish. Or send a homemade bomb to people he doesn't agree with politically. And the rest of us are shocked. We're shocked because we've never lived like this before. But the rest of the world has. And it has been often far worse. What's the difference? We lived above it because of our biblical base. A base that has been eroded. You know what shocks me? It shocks me that there are so many more who would never do anything remotely like this. In a world where God is a dirty word and where church is nothing more than entertainment or mystical asceticism, it's a wonder anybody has their head on straight and their heart oriented toward God. But they do. And because of this, the world has not yet spiraled completely out of control. God is still at work in the hearts of men and women, calling out a people for his own name's sake, working his plan, following his timetable. And all of that will continue until he, God, says it's enough. Are you one of God's children? Or are you a child of the world? Have you looked at your own heart and your own life and said, you know, this isn't good. This isn't right. And have you got down on your knees and prayed to God to show you what is? And in seeing what is, have you repented, turned your back on the nonsense, and embraced what God has provided? God has provided escape. Through the sacrifice and the blood of another, he has washed away sin, taken it out of the equation. And all those who entrust their heart, their life, their very being, and all that is their future to God through the Lord Jesus Christ will live forever. Thankfully, not here on this earth, in this condition, but with God. Are you saved? You don't know? Find somebody and ask them. You can't find anybody? Shoot me an email. We'll talk. Told you it was long. Gotta go, chickens. It's after 10 o'clock here on the eastern seaboard. And tomorrow is another day. I've got 2 more hours of work to do to edit these things and get them posted before I'm allowed to go to bed. I appreciate so many of you praying about my new endeavor. A week from Tuesday will be my first foray into this new world of employment. It's a training session on the job training type thing. Goes halfway good. We may have a launch period. So you just keep praying for me. It's like getting a drink out of a faucet. But we're getting down to it. And we'll talk. During the week, you'll send me questions. I'll answer them. You'll give me information that you think is important for the Bible Forum, and we'll evaluate it, maybe use some of it. We'll pray for one another. And we'll get together next Sunday night, Lord willing. Take care of yourself.